All right. So I just had an interesting match, just a random game I jammed in the practice room, and I wanted to talk about it um, because I thought it's not an unheard of matchup, but it's an interesting matchup. Um, and so it's something that you might encounter in the early rounds of like a Grand Prix or whatever. So anyway, I wanted to discuss it because I don't think I've done it yet, and so and it's a very interesting dynamic to the matchup. So starting off here, I lose the roll, and this hand is fine. It's got some mana, it's got disruption and cantrips, so like I'm not gonna throw it back. Um, but it is definitely a little ways off from doing much of anything. So they keep 7 as well, and they lead on Polluted Delta. I think they ponder first, um, and pass the turn. And I don't remember what they did with this ponder, so I'm gonna pop open the. No, I guess I can't see the chat. Doesn't really matter. So they ponder, and then pass the turn to me, and I just lead off on Underground Sea and Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize Oracle is a very poor draw right now. Another cantrip or something like a Doomsday would have been much, much better. But anyway, I lead off on the Thoughtseize, and I'll see that they are on High Tide. Now, High Tide is an extremely tense matchup. I don't know how else to say it. You often have to basically you settle in for a very long game. Stop them from comboing off, so that usually means trying to take their high tides, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, for them to combo off without a high tide. So if you stop them from getting high tides, then you can kind of just very slowly grind through their disruption. But as you'll see in this hand, they're a little light on lands, but they have a bunch of counter magic, and they have combo pieces and they have cantrips. So like this is a very strong hand, I think, from them. If they found more lands off the ponder, that makes it even better. So I Thoughtseize, and I believe I take the high tide here in keeping with my in keeping with my theory that you need to stop them from comboing off, or use your disruption to stop them from comboing off, and then try and power through their disruption. So take the Thoughtseize. I'm going to click play here. I believe they probably just preordain on their turn, which is of course to be expected. So I actually just want to mention, at this point in the game, I'm seriously considering whether the right play for me is going to be to try and cast my creatures and go on and beat down plan. Obviously, I'm a little far off from being able to cast a Street Wraith, but the fact that they can get through Flusterstorm and they're not super likely to get forced makes me wonder if that might actually be a valid plan, although I don't go through with it. So I draw Doomsday, which is, of course, a good draw here. I'll preordain. I'm actually going to slow this down a little bit. I don't remember what I saw off that. But anyway, I think I topped both. I draw the Ponder. I don't remember what the other card was, so it might have been a top-bottom. I play the Valk, and then I Ponder again. And here we find another Thoughtseize and a Veil of Summer and another Ritual. So these are also all good cards. If I have to use the Veil of Summer, I won't be able to get the Cabal Ritual. But anyway, so I take those cards. I draw the Thoughtseize, and then I leave the Veil next. So drawing this Disruption is good, and if I can get up the Threshold, I'll actually be pretty close to being able to Doomsday, like Cabal right with Threshold, Doomsday, and use Street Wraith to draw my draw 4. So a plan is starting to form, and that also doesn't involve Lionside Diamond, so the Oracle in my hand is not really an issue. So I just need to be able to get to Threshold before they beat me. And if we're following along with what we know is in their hand, they have cast this Preordain, so I know that these are 4 of the cards in their hand, and they have 2 unknowns. So I draw the Veil here. I'll play my Misty. I'll Thoughtseize, and I believe they choose to force this Thoughtseize. And I decide that it actually makes sense for me to... So they force the Thoughtseize. They think about it a little bit, but they end up forcing the Thoughtseize, and they pitch Merchant Scroll. So that's one of the unknown cards. So there goes a force. So now they only have 1 unknown. I decide that I think it makes sense to Veil here, and the reason for that is if they don't counter it, I draw a card. If they do counter it, they either probably force pitching Time Spiral, which will take away their Time Spiral, or they force pitching Fluster, which gets rid of 2 counters and seems like a dumb move by them, or they Fluster it, which gets rid of another difficult to deal with card. So, like, this is going to eat a counter at some point, most likely anyway. So I decided to just go for it. I think it's debatable whether that's correct, but keep in mind that I'm trying to get to Threshold, and if I never draw another land, then I will need Valk plus Underground Sea plus Threshold plus the Bayou to have my 6 mana for Doomsday, Street Wraith, draw 4. So getting the card in the graveyard kind of makes sense for my game plan, and it gets a counterspell out of their hand. So they decide to Fluster, and I just let it all happen. But at this point, I know 2 out of 3 cards in their hand. So they have 1 force left and a Time Spiral. And we'll see what happens here. So they obviously they've drawn a cantrip. I don't know if that was one of the cards they already had or their draw for the turn. But they cantrip, and then they play a land. So again, two knowns and 1 unknown. Now, we'll see what I draw here. I draw Burning Wish, and this is actually another very good draw because it either eats a counter or it grabs me Cabal Therapy from my sideboard. So they let the Burning Wish resolve, and then they counter the Cabal Therapy that I grab, which is fine. That kind of makes sense. I think they don't want me to see their hand. So notably, they actually pitch Time Spiral. So I know they don't really have a lot left going on in their hand. And the fact that they pitch the Time Spiral makes me think that they either have another counterspell that they want to hold on to, or the last card in the hand is a High Tide, and they would rather give up the Time Spiral than give up the High Tide because they've already lost 1 High Tide. So here, I decided I'm going to go for it. I'm going to take a chance that they don't have anything in their hand, because even if my Doomsday gets countered, so in this situation, because I drew especially because I drew the second Doomsday, if the first Doomsday gets countered, I can cast the second one and make a pass the turn pile. And while that's a little dangerous because they could like Merchant Scroll for Brainstorm or potentially Cunning Wish for Brainstorm, depending on what their draw is like, because they would need High Tides, I think, to have enough mana for that. But anyway, I'm a little vulnerable to a Brainstorm if they have it. But if it resolves, I'm probably just going to win the game because they would almost certainly counter the Doomsday. So I'm going to get rid of their hand. I will make my pile, which is going to be very simple. It's going to be the draw 4. I misclicked and clicked the Ponder, so ignore the fact that I had Ponder highlighted there. So it's just going to be Lotus Petal, Thoughtseize, Lotus Petal, Thoughtseize, and a draw 4. And so what happens here is Doomsday will put me down to 8, Street Wraith puts me down to 6, Cruel Bargain puts me to 3, Thoughtseize puts me to 1, and I can Thoughtseize them just to make sure they aren't holding on to anything that would trouble me. But at that point in the game, probably it's not going to make a difference. They if they've let me resolve my combo this far, they're very unlikely to have anything that would matter. But you go through with it. So I Cruel Bargain, Thoughtseize them, and you'll see that their hand was 2 High Tides. And so presumably I was correct in thinking that the last card in their hand was another High Tide. And then they drew a second one. And so easily winning the game. By easily, I mean we had to go through a lot of counter magic and stop them from comboing off. And so striking that balance can be tricky in this matchup. And that's part of why I think it's interesting. I definitely drew pretty well to hit a lot of my Thoughtseizes. But anyway, that's the game. So we'll go on to game number 2 here. Game number 2 is kind of interesting. So, for sideboarding here, I cut my echoes and I brought in my empties. The reasoning being that if I can get a quick empty off, High Tide can't really win before turn 4 easily. Sometimes I think they can win on turn 3, but they can't really win before turn 4. And so you need, a quick empty can just be too fast for them. And naturally drawn empty is good for going through their counter spells. Since they typically aren't playing white for something like Terminus, the number of ways they have to deal with it is somewhat limited. This hand's pretty strong, even though it lacks disruption, so I'm going to keep it. This is the kind of hand that could potentially grind through some counter spells. So, they play an island, they just pass, which makes me think they're probably holding up a Flusterstorm. I draw an empty, which I decide I'll probably kind of hedge my bets and play towards that. Although the fact that they seem to be holding up like a likely Flusterstorm makes that slightly less worthwhile. But anyway, so I Brainstorm here. My Brainstorm's pretty good. I drew the disruption that I was missing. And so I actually decide here that I think it makes sense to just try to go for a Deterministic kill. And I put back 1 Burning Wish and the empty. And so I crack the Misty and I just Cabal Therapy right now. This will let me either see their hand or they'll counter it or something. But I still have the Veil for my own protection, and I still have multiple business spells and a cantrip, so I'm not exactly, I'm not far behind or anything if this doesn't resolve or if I miss on it. Which is good, because I actually end up missing on it. I named Force of Will. I was debating between Force and Flusterstorm, but they didn't actually have either. Brainstorm, Merchant Scroll, double Time Spiral. So, obviously, Time Spiral there would have been good, but that's unlikely to be a hit. And since I'm kind of planning on going off next turn, I'm thinking they likely aren't winning next turn. I might be winning next turn, and I don't want them to have multiple counter spells. So that's why in this situation, I'm taking their counter spells instead of their combo pieces. But anyway, on their turn, they just play a land, which I think I saw so they had some islands in their hand. So they just play a land and pass. And now, here's kind of where the interesting thing happens. So I draw another Veil of Summer. I think to myself, I could cast the Darkrit Doomsday, use the Veil of Summer, and if the Veil and the Doomsday get countered, I could just pass a turn, or Brainstorm to try and find something. If the Doomsday resolves, or the Veil resolves, I can try and set up some kind of either pass a turn pile, or in my head I was actually thinking about an Echo pile, but I took all the Echoes of my deck, and this is making me think that maybe it would have been smart to leave an Echo in for situations like this, where you could Brainstorm into 2 Echo or 2 LEDs and an Echo and put back Burning Wish, Veil of Summer, and then combo off like that. But anyway, what ends up happening is I Darkrit off the Badlands, because with this plan, the Burning Wish is going back into my pile, so I'll have to make some red mana somewhere along the line, but I do need the green for Veil and the blue for Brainstorm to crack into my pile. So, Dark Red off the Badlands. That resolves. Cast Doomsday. Doomsday gets countered, or actually, this is an interesting point. I forgot this happened. So, they cast the Brainstorm here, and to me that screams like they hid cards. They hid their counter magic like an extra card down when they Brainstormed last turn, and now they're trying to fish it up. And so I actually Veil in response to the Brainstorm, which I think is a smart thing to do, because like even if they still have the counter spell in their hand, like if they counter the Veil or they counter the Doomsday on top of the Veil, like I'm still going to cantrip off the Veil. I'm not going to be in a super bad spot. And the payoff is huge if they didn't have the counter spell. The Lotus Petal here is actually a perfect draw, because it lets me actually win this turn, which I'm not convinced there was a pile without Echo in my deck as it stood. Because Echo's not in my deck, and Ideas Unbound is in my sideboard, actually. So anyway, so the Veil resolves, then Brainstorm, Doomsday resolves, and from this spot I can make a pile that is LED, Ponder, and then 2 cards that don't matter. My Storm count's 4, so I'll go Brainstorm and Storm 5, draw LED, Ponder, put back Veil and Burning Wish, and then I'll play LED, Petal, which is Storm 6, 7, 8. Ponder is 9. Ponder into the Burning Wish is 10. And then Burning Wish for Tendrils for Storm 11. And that's all because I top decked the Lotus Petal off that Veil. But they just concede. And so I don't actually have to build that pile. But it's interesting to note that I might not have been able to win the game from the position I put myself in, and I got ahead of myself thinking that like I had Ideas Unbound in my deck, or I had an Echo in my deck, and so those are little mistakes that sometimes are costly, and make me need to rethink my sideboarding plan a little bit, and or just pay fucking attention to what I'm doing. But anyway, I think that matchup was kind of interesting, so thanks for watching, and yeah, that's it. Go fuck yourself. How do I turn this off?